Hello and welcome. Today we are going to present a unique video that to some will be horrible to watch and learn about. In psychology, there is a term called Adele Syndrome. This syndrome describes the emotional and psychological obsession one person has with another human being. The name of this syndrome was derived from the unrequited love Adele Hugo, the daughter of author Victor Hugo, had for Army officer Alfred Pinson. She was a very attractive and talented woman who played the piano beautifully. Yet her obsession with this young officer led her to masquerade as his wife for years as well as poison his and her life. Adele Syndrome led Adele Hugo to ruin the military career and personal life of Alfred Pinson. Her unstable mental condition as well as her ongoing actions led her to be incarcerated in a psychiatric hospital for 43 years. The illness did not prevent her from living a long life, and she died at the age of 84. Unfortunately, Adele Syndrome is not a rare condition, and the person suffering from this disease can lose control of their emotions and become obsessed with another person. The treatment for this terrible disease requires an experienced psychologist whose experience and education can help relieve the afflicted person. But in some cases, since this syndrome borders the boundary between sanity and insanity, hospitalization is often the best treatment. Left unchecked, this disease can cause sufferers to commit unpredictable and very extreme cruel acts. This level of cruelty is seen in the case of Emma Young-Stig, SP, whose acts shocked European society because of its level of brutality. At the time, it was the most brutal episode in all of Swedish forensic science. While the perpetrator was seen as insane, there was a lack of hard evidence until he showed his true colors during the trial. Emma Young-Stig was born on February 16, 1985 in Stockholm to a young, naive family where she was the youngest of two girls. Her family life was simple, and her older sister was named Katarina. At 19, Emma married a young man named Nicholas, whom she had been dating while still in high school. Nicholas was close to her age, and when the marriage took place, Emma was already pregnant with her first child. At the age of 20, she gave birth to her first child, a son whom she named Max. Then, barely a year and a half later, she became a mother a second time. This time she had a daughter whom she named Saga. Sadly, the young couple were not prepared for marriage or family life. The daily troubles they endured caused them to argue over minor issues as well as consider separating and eventually divorcing. The issue of child custody was a long, difficult, and hard road, but the problem was eventually solved when Nicholas agreed to help the children financially as well as remain in their lives. Emma did not disagree with the custody arrangement, but after the divorce, she moved to a small Swedish town called Arboga, which was 150 kilometers from Stockholm. This move was made so Emma could be close to her new lover, and she took the children with her. However, Nicholas did not want her to make this move, as that would mean he was removed from his children's lives. Daily court battles were conducted to help solve this problem. A peaceful settlement was not forthcoming, and the daily court battles ended with Nicholas threatening Emma. Emma reported the threat to the police and sought to have sole custody of the children. At this time, Emma met a new love on the internet, a man named Torgny Heldberg. The young man was not intimidated by the fact that Emma already had two children, and upon finding common interests, the two adults began a romantic relationship. Torgny had always wanted a family, so the two children were not a problem in his eyes. He accepted them as his own, and they lived in a small house Torgny inherited. After they married, they would look for a larger home where the two children could have their own rooms and the family could live comfortably. Emma was busy raising her children, creating a home as well as planning to return to work as a designer. The marriage was to take place in 2008, but something unimaginable took place that destroyed all those plans. March 17, 2008, dawned, and by all considerations, it was another normal, quiet Monday. Torgny went to work, and Emma stayed home with her two young children. Emma's day was spent with her family, and towards evening, when she expected Torgny home, she was preparing dinner while chatting with Katrina online. The two sisters were discussing which anniversary gift they would give their parents. Torgny called at about 6:30 to tell Emma that he would be home late and that she and the children should eat. After hanging up the phone, Emma returned to her household chores. She fed the children and then returned talking to her sister through the internet. It was just after 7 p.m. when Katrina noticed that Emma abruptly stopped texting. She saw that her sister was typing, and in the middle of one word, She just stopped. After 5 minutes of silence, Katrina called Emma, but there was no answer. Worried, she quickly called Torgny, and he reassured her that he was almost home and everything seemed fine. He reasoned that Emma was probably interrupted by one of the children. With this thought in mind, Torgny was surprised that the front door was unlocked and the interior of the house was a mess. Calling out their names and receiving no answer, Torgny started to search the house. What he found was the sight nightmares are made of. First, he found brown stains which turned out to be dried blood. Then he stumbled across what he thought was a doll due to its unnatural pose. Instead, he found young Saga in a pool of her own blood, wearing a heavily disfigured face, making it impossible to recognize her. Her brother Max was not too far away with the same brutal disfigurement. Emma was just beyond Max and suffered similar wounds. Torgny thought they were dead and immediately called emergency aid. Emma shuddered and groaned at that point, and when paramedics and the police arrived, they found weak pulses in all 3 victims. Paramedics did everything they could to revive and treat the victims so they could be transported to the nearest hospital. However, the paramedics felt this was going to be an impossible task. A miracle took place as the paramedics were successful and the 3 victims were transferred to the hospital for better care. The doctors did all they could to save the 2 young children, and the prognosis was that even if the children were saved, they would not be able to breathe on their own. Emma was in a bit better shape and was placed in a medically induced coma for better treatment and the hope that the body would recover from these horrible wounds. She was placed on life support to facilitate her treatments. Meanwhile, while doctors rushed to save the lives of the 3 victims, investigators searched for clues as to who committed the crime. But because items had to be moved, and the medics left a lot of clutter behind, this was not going to be an easy task. The 3 victims were stomped on, and investigators worked tirelessly to figure out whose footprints caused the damage. They also searched for prints to see who may have committed the crime. The crime took only 13 minutes between the about ending to Emma's and Katrina's conversation to when Torgny called the police. The investigators did conclude that whoever committed this massacre had a deep personal motive and hatred for the victims. They concluded that a blunt object was used by the perpetrator, and a hammer was the most likely object used. However, the hammer or any other blunt object was not to be found at the crime scene. Thus, the investigators concluded the offender took it with him. As per standard operating procedures, Torgny was considered the prime suspect. However, he had an airtight alibi. His boss and co-workers confirmed he was working late, and at the time of the murders, he was caught on several CCTV cameras walking home. Torgny did provide a detailed statement, as he may have noticed something as he walked home. Unfortunately for the investigators, Torgny did not see anything unusual, and to him, it was an ordinary walk home from a day of work. The only thing out of the ordinary for him was the unlocked front door, which to investigators meant that Emma knew her attacker. Torgny was released, and he immediately contacted his fiancée's family, who rushed to Arbuga and went straight to the hospital to be by Emma's and the children's sides. While on their way, they heard through the news on their car radio that the 2 children died as a result of their injuries. With Torgny cleared of committing the crime, investigators turned their attention to Emma's ex-husband, Nicholas. The police were well aware of the contentious divorce proceedings and custody battles, as well as Nicholas's threats to Emma. When arrested, Nicholas's reaction to the news caused the investigators to doubt that he committed the crime. He had an honest reaction, breaking down upon hearing of the death of his children and the attack on his ex-wife. During this time, he would cry and then shout that he would never hurt his children. When the investigators asked where he was at the time of the murder, Nicholas told them he was in another town on business. Investigators checked his alibi and found that Nicholas indeed was 120 kilometers away at the time of the massacre. The investigators now faced a difficult task. They had to find an unknown attacker, and with the crime scene in disarray and the number of people at the scene of the crime, it was an arduous task to retrieve and compare footprints. Facing the possibility of a return attack once the attacker heard that Emma had survived and may, after returning to consciousness, identify her attacker, the police placed a 24-hour guard in front of her hospital room. Police then questioned neighbors to see if they saw a strange person or strange behavior around Emma's and Tor's home. One neighbor described a person all dressed in black with his or her face covered walking around the home. The person was described as short and fragile, leading investigators to consider that a woman may have been the attacker. This shadowy figure was also caught on a CCTV camera not far from Emma's home. This led investigators to conclude it was a female who attacked Emma and her children. In showing Torgny the video, he was surprised as it looked like his ex-girlfriend Christina Schurer, but he was not sure. Christina's history was almost as tragic as the murder she committed. Born in Hanover, Germany, her father left the family and stopped talking to her. This had a profound effect on her mental stability. But before this unstable mental state took over, Christina was able to go on an exchange program to New York as well as be educated in both history and archaeology. Eventually, she took a job at a hotel in Greece as a tour guide. It was here where she and Torgny met and had a brief affair. They did stay in touch after Torgny left, but Christina was not letting go as she traveled to Sweden and demanded to stay in Torgny's house while she was there. After her offer for a weekend getaway was turned down by Torgny and told that it was over between them, Christina continued to pursue Torgny through unwanted letters and other means of contact. Her stalking of Torgny did pay off as he agreed to restart their romance even though he told her he was seeing someone else. Using the excuse that she forgot something in his house, Torgny let her inside, whereby Christina tried to seduce him. After receiving a firm rejection, Christian told him that he would regret that decision. The stalking continued, and Christina's future offers were also rejected by Torgny. Saying she could not live without him, Christina used emotional blackmail to try and win Torgny back. She claimed she had swallowed enough pills and would die. Torgny decided to call her family and tell them about Christina's behavior, advising them that Christina needed psychiatric help. The mother placed Christina in a psychiatric hospital where the latter received treatment for a month. Sadly, the treatment did not work, and upon release, Christina moved to Sweden to begin stalking her ex once again. She returned to her emotional blackmail strategy by telling Torgny that she had his child but gave it away to a foster family. Torgny did not think this was possible. For the few times they were intimate in the past year, she did not show any signs of a pregnancy. Christina even went as far as telling Torgny that their son contracted a hereditary disease and the two of them needed to go to Germany to see the boy. She also stated that the adoptive father would contact him to give him all the details. Unknown to Christina was the fact that Torgny had told all of this to Emma, and Emma felt that Christian was trying to lure Torgny to Germany where no son existed. A man did call Torgny, claiming to be the adoptive father, but upon questioning the man simply evaded giving any real answers. The man became annoyed at all the questions and hung up, whereby Torgny realized that Christina made the whole story up. Torgny told police about Christina and her antics after the massacre. The police then went to Christine's home but were told by a roommate that Christina hurriedly packed her things and returned to Germany. The story was true as investigators found evidence that Christina did return to her native country. Seeking help from their German counterparts, the Swedish police were able to execute an arrest warrant on March 20th. Although Christina denied any part in the massacre, she was extradited to Sweden to face trial. Back in Sweden, Christina continually asked to meet with Torgny, but the requests were denied. At this time, the investigators had found the one set of footprints that did not belong to all the police, medics, and Torgny. The footprint belonged to a foot in an athletic shoe. Police went to Christina's apartment and thoroughly searched it, but did not find any blood, bloody clothes, or the blunt object used in the attack. Then when Christina denied owning those shoes, her roommate told a different story and identified them as Christina's. As the police searched Christina's laptop, they found folders filled with photos. Some were of her and Torgny, others were of Torgny alone, and still more with him and Emma. In some cases, the photos of Emma and the children were taken from Torgny's social media accounts, and the photos were surrounded by threats. The police also found web searches on how to murder without leaving a trace in recovered trashed files. These files also contained information on how not to leave any trace of the identity of the attacker, as well as how to divert attention away from the attacker. There was also a floor plan of Torgny's and Emma's home on her laptop, with notes describing Torgny's habit when he left home and returned from work. There is some good news in all of this. Emma was responding positively to treatment, and she recovered enough that the doctors took her out of her medically induced coma. Not being able to speak because of the breathing tool, she was able to recognize loved ones. She did not know how she ended up in the hospital. As she grew stronger, the police decided to talk to her, but left out the information about the tragic deaths of her children. Emma was convinced she was in a car accident and did not remember any details of the attack. She kept asking about her children and her family, as well as the police decided they could no longer hold back this horrible information. Upon hearing the news, Emma became hysterical and had to be sedated. When she woke up, she did not remember the conversation and had to be told again about her children. This was a scene that was repeated over and over for several weeks. It wasn't until Emma was strong enough that investigators took her to her home to view the scene of the crime. It was at this time that she remembered what happened. Emma told them that she was texting her sister, setting the table, and her children were near her when a knock at the door came. When she answered, she was confronted by a figure in dark clothing. Emma said she asked what the woman wanted, and her answer was something striking her, causing her a lot of pain. Using her last ounce of strength, Emma said she tried to protect her children, but to no avail. She collapsed in the hallway where the attacker tried to finish her off. And there was a chance that Christina may be able to get off with the murder of the 2 children and the attempted murder of Emma. During the trial, she denied her participation, and all the evidence was circumstantial. However, Christina's roommate provided another piece of the puzzle when she testified that her hammer had mysteriously gone missing from her toolkit. The investigators examined the toolkit and the brand of tools and determined this was the brand of hammer that was used in the attacks. This, too, was circumstantial, and things looked grim for the prosecutor. Other evidence showing that Christina visited Arbuga frequently was also circumstantial, and it was theorized that she was keeping an eye on her future victims. While on trial for a double murder with cruelty and 1 charge of attempted murder, Christina began to act strangely. She waved at spectators, smiled, and even laughed when shown the gruesome images of the crimes, and it was thought that she was insane. A psychiatrist concluded that Christina was sane and could finish the trial. The psychiatrist also said Christina was fully aware of what she had done and experienced joy in committing the crimes. But it wasn't until Emma was brought to the courtroom that the case stopped being circumstantial. Upon seeing Christina's face, Emma fainted. When revived, Emma said that Christina's face was the last thing she saw on that tragic day. Even though Christina's defense lawyer fought for Christina's innocence, the jury found her guilty of all crimes. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole and ordered to pay 20,000 euros in compensation to Emma. In conclusion, no evidence was ever found that Christina was pregnant with Torgny's child. As for Emma and Torgny, 2 years after their planned nuptials, they wed and now have 2 children who are fully aware of what happened to their older brother and sister.